My name is Hanne Beate Ueland, and I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you all to this seminar, and especially today's esteemed speakers and artists who will help broaden our perspectives on the exhibition. We are very much looking forward to your contributions today. And I also want to express my deep gratitude and appreciation to the wonderful curators, Helga Nyman and Vibece Salthe, for organizing this seminar with such scholarly precision. Your impressive efforts, especially within such a limited time frame, deserve our deepest gratitude. This seminar has been made possible thanks to the generous support of the Adam Mickiewicz Institute. A warm thank you also to Ingebjørg Folgerød and Ådne Kverneland for financial support of the exhibition. A few practical notes. In case of an emergency, please use the exit doors in the back or in the front. Kindly silence your mobile phones or enable flight mode. Restrooms are located just outside the auditorium. Vibeke and Helga.
Dear speakers, dear guests, dear friends of the museum. On behalf of Helga Nyman and myself, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this seminar in connection with the exhibition The Plastic Body. This is the final week of the exhibition, and we are grateful for the opportunity to delve deeper into the topic it addresses, the artistic practices represented, and to explore beyond its modest scope, together with prominent scholars who have been an inspiration to us throughout the development of the exhibition. Today's program also features two brilliant contemporary artists whose work allow us to draw connections to current situations and conditions. We will present a film by the Danish artist Luna Scales and conclude with a performance by the Polish artist Veronika Lewandowska.
The seminar is structured in two parts, with one session before lunch and another after. We will take a break for lunch at 12:30, and you are welcome to join us for a brief tour of the exhibition at 1. Those who have pre-ordered lunch will have it served outside the auditorium, and the museum cafe is also open and offers snacks and light dishes. There will also be a short break after the last presentation before we resume here in the auditorium for Veronika Lewandowska's performance. Complimentary coffee and tea will be available during this break. The seminar is being recorded and will be published on the museum website. We encourage an active audience, but we kindly ask you to save your questions until after each presentation. When organizing this seminar and the exhibition, we were met with great kindness and helpfulness from our colleagues in Poland. We have relied on recent art historical research conducted in Poland and elsewhere, and we would specifically like to thank Małgorzata Gluchowska at the Adam Mickiewicz Institute and Jaroslav Suhan, art historian and one of the curators for a traveling monographic exhibition with Maria Pininska-Bereš, for generously sharing their advice and contacts.
Before we leave the floor to our brilliant contributors, we would like to say a few words about the exhibition. The exhibition, The Plastic Body, grew out of a shared interest in the artistic legacies of Eastern Europe. We have long admired the work of Alina Shaposhnikov, as well as that of Magdalena Abakanowicz, who had a significant influence on Norwegian textile art in the 1970s. On several occasions, Abakanowicz crossed paths with one of the major artists in our collection, Jan Groth. One example of this is that they both exhibited at the International Biennial in Lausanne. The museum has also an early work by Sofia Kulik on long-term loan, which has for us served as an entry point into a rich and experimental period in Polish art. Several of the artists in the exhibition visited and exhibited in Scandinavia. In Norway, there was a significant interest in Poland during the period covered by the exhibition, and we have been particularly interested in the formal and informal artistic exchange between Norway and Poland in the 1970s and 80s. Wanda Jakubowska took part in a group exhibition in Norway in 1958. Magdalena Bakanovic had her first solo exhibition outside of Poland in Norway in 1967, an exhibition that toured several Norwegian cities, including Stavanger. Teresa Murak participated in the land art project Art and Nature in Lillehammer in 1987. Despite this, most of the artists in the exhibition remain largely unknown to the general public in Norway. From our perspective, it seems that the division between East and West during this period has influenced our understanding of European art history, and there is less knowledge about the rich artistic legacies of the former East. One of the main ideas underlying this exhibition has, therefore, been to highlight their innovative contributions into post-war art history.
The Plastic Body is a curated exhibition. It's a modest selection of artworks by 10 artists, and it's not a survey of Polish sculpture from the period. The artists did not belong to a group or a movement, although some of them knew each other as colleagues or friends. The works in the exhibition represent an expanded notion of sculpture. Some of the artists emphasized temporality and the process itself, and the exhibition therefore includes photographs, film, and performance. Under the guidance of their professors, many of the artists included in the exhibition were encouraged to experiment and to find their own means of expression. This approach is reflected in the exhibition title, The Plastic Body. The word plastic refers to something malleable, elastic, or flexible. The title alludes both to sculpture as a plastic art and to the way these works expand the definition of body by representing it in new ways. The title also refers to the new plastic materials used by several of the artists in the exhibition. Our relationship with these materials has naturally changed over time, but in the 1960s, plastic was a material of possibilities. The use of new materials was partly driven by economic concerns. Textiles, seeds, and plastic materials like polyester and resin were inexpensive alternatives to stone and bronze. They were easy to handle and allowed for a faster creative process than traditional materials. The artists moved away from conventional representation of the human body, instead exploring the body as a site for resistance, transformation, and freedom. The works in the exhibition portray the human body as vulnerable and transient, yet also as a site for sensuality and desire. The fragmented body appears in many of the artworks in the exhibition. These are bodies that bear witness to violence and the misuse of power. Several of the artists in the show experienced the Second World War and its aftermath in a war-torn communist Poland. Bodies traumatized by the war must have been a common sight. In response to this reality, artists in the 1960s turned to surrealism, which manifested itself in the fragmented and rearranged logic of the body. But as expressions of body art, the works in the exhibition convey ideas that transcend their historical context. They remain highly relevant to current artistic explorations of the politics of the human body. And by also including contemporary artistic contributions in this seminar, we invite you to make connections across time and across borders.
The exhibition is an all-woman show, but we have been careful not to frame it as a feminist exhibition. There are certainly gender perspectives inherent in the exhibition, as there should be in all the work we do. And there are some works that are clearly feminist. However, it's an exhibition where individual freedom and freedom of expression runs as a thread throughout the show. This perspective seems even more pressing now than when we first started exploring the possibilities of creating this exhibition. According to the Democracy Index, and I quote, less than 8% of the world's population live in a full democracy, while almost 40% live under authoritarian rule, a share that has been creeping up in recent years. So with this short introduction, we would like to proceed and introduce you to today's first speaker.
And it's my honor to introduce Agata Jakubowska, who's joining us digitally from Warsaw. Jakubowska is a professor at the Institute of Art History at the University of University of Warsaw. She's one of the most prominent art historians in Poland. Her contributions to the production of knowledge on post-war art in Poland, and specifically on art by women, have been of great importance and inspiration to us. Her PhD thesis, entitled On the Margins of the Mirror, The Female Body in the Works of Polish Female Artists, was published in 2004. Jakubowska has published books on Alina Shaposhnikov and most recently on Maria Pininska-Beresz. At the University of Warsaw, she leads a research project entitled Globalizing the History of All Women Exhibitions. In her lecture, Jakubowska will focus on Maria Pininska-Beresz, Magdalena Bakanowicz, and Alina Shaposhnikov. Please join me in welcoming Agata Jakubowska.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Vibece and Helga, for your kind introduction and for inviting me to take part in this symposium. And also, I'm really grateful that you created this opportunity, that you curated this exhibition and created an opportunity to for the Norwegian audience to see a selection of works made by Polish artists. As was said, I will share my screen now. As was said before, I will concentrate on three artists participating in the exhibition: Maria Pininska-Beresz, Magdalena Bakanowicz, and Alina Shaposhnikov. And in the first part of the lecture, I will discuss the art and career of Maria Pininska-Beresz as it developed in the 1960s. In the second part of the lecture, I will introduce works from the same period made by Magdalena Bakanowicz and Alina Shaposhnikov. And I choose these two artists because in an interesting way, their artistic careers destabilize notions of sculpture and from Poland that appear in the exhibition's title. And I will relate them, this destabilization, to the notion of emancipation. I hope it will be clear during my lecture. I know these images are not good quality images, but I am not able to see the exhibition. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it to Stavanger, but I watched films prepared by Vibece and Helga, and so it gave me some experience of the exhibition, and these are just shots from the films they made. So in 1993, Maria Pininska-Beresz participated in a feminist conference that was organized in Vienna. And during this conference, some canonical artworks created by feminist artists were presented, like the dinner party by Judy Chicago. Pininska-Beresz remembered that she talked about her works from the end of the 60s, her tables, and nobody believed her that she could have created these works before Judy Chicago in a country, in Poland, in a country where there was no feminism. And this is a starting point for me, for my story for my narration about Maria Pininska's career. The story in which I don't want to relate her to second wave feminism, but rather to show the origins of her works that we consider today feminist works, that were created apparently before the 1970s. So here is another table that you can see in the exhibition. So this is the photo presenting Maria Pinińska-Bereś among her colleagues and with her professor Ksawery Dunikowski during her study years at the Academy of Fine Arts in Krakow. You can see Maria Pinińska-Bereś on the front in the dark sweater. I don't know whether you can see. Here is Maria Pinińska-Bereś. She studied with Dunikowski, who supported intensively his female students, and also somehow, as Maria Pinińska-Bereś remembered, somehow protected them from socialist realism, of a necessity to follow socialist realism, and instead encouraged them to develop their own individual art language. After the graduation, Maria Pinińska-Bereś started exhibiting, and she had her first successes. But what she did in this period was, we could consider this a very typical art of the second half of the 1950s, the style that appears also in the works of other female women artists. I am here juxtaposing her, for example, with Barbara Zbrożyna's work called Motherhood. In 1958, Maria Pinińska-Bereś gave birth to her daughter, Bettina, and she said it a couple of times that that stopped her career, development of her career for a couple of years. And she managed to come back to the art world and to be active in it again at the beginning of the 50s, at the beginning of the 60s, I'm sorry, where she, together with her husband Jerzy Bereś, also a sculptor, when they initiated an annual exhibition, the Sculpture of the Year. It was an exhibition that was a kind of a competition and exhibition through which they wanted to develop innovative sculpture in Poland. It was observed by many art critics that the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s brought some kind of a crisis in modern sculpture in Poland. That the crisis meant that the new works were recognized as not interesting, as still as all the time repeating different modern formulas. And so one of the objectives of Maria Pinińska-Bereś and, as I said, her husband Jerzy Bereś at the beginning of the 60s was a renewal of sculpture. And both of them intensively experimented at that time. And here what you can see is are the first important, according to me and many other art historians, works made by Pinińska-Bereś, a series titled Rotundas. You can see photos taken in the 1990s. These are one of the best presentations of this works. The first one was Rotunda with votive offerings made in 1961, but they all were concrete forms in which she used also various objects found around her. And what is important in this period is also that she experimented with exhibiting these works. Here it is also not a good image, I'm aware of it, but I want to show you the experiments with exhibiting the sculpture. And here at the back you can see the sculpture exhibited in a quite traditional way, although it is standing on a cloth. Maria Pinińska-Bereś made special cloths to put her sculptures on it. And here you can see other experiments. On your left-hand side, you can see a photo made by Wojciech Pliwiński. The photo represents studio experiment. It was not taken during any exhibition. Just Pliwiński was invited by the Bereś to their studio, to their apartment, and they made several experiments. What you see on your right-hand side is a photo from a group exhibition from '65, where you can see that Peniska Bereś introduced this blanket as a way of presenting her sculptures. And there are some letters in the archive that show that actually people were somehow confused what to do with this blanket, how to present it. But it was very important for her to as I said, to go beyond the traditional way of treating the sculpture. And she continued this experiments with various materials. She started introducing more intensively the soft fabrics that we associate Peniska Bereś with. As you can see on this work, for example, titled Lady with a Bird. But also Lucy from '68 is very important because this is the first work when Peniska Bereś used papier-mâché. And there is a nice story repeated by her daughter that the usage of papier-mâché was actually inspired by Bettina's, that is the daughter of the artist, activities in a kindergarten. That she brought it from a kindergarten, and Peniska Bereś started not using it in her art. And I find this story, this anecdote, very important because it's an example of a process that we can call, and that is often called by different scholars, the process of unlearning, that is going away from what you learned at the art school, in her case, what she learned at the art school with Dunikowski, and going into new areas, new fabrics, new materials, new techniques that are really associated not with high quality art and high quality education, but that rather look for inspiration in areas far from academia. And I want to I'm sorry. I want to show you two works from one moment. And two works from another series, but three works actually, from another series that she started doing in the second half of the '60s, a series titled Corsets. And here she continued with experimenting with different new materials, but also these two works, Standing Corset and Corset on a Board, include some autobiographical tropes. In a standing corset, you can see her, and we know that it's her hair. She cut her hair and used it here in this work. And in the corset on a board, we can see two footprints, and we also know that these are the artist's footprints. It's quite important because it tells us actually that she tried to directly connect these artworks with her personal experiences. And when talking about these artworks and about what meanings actually they had for Peniska Bereś, I want to underline that I perceive them as some kind of commentaries on specific modernization that was that was developing in the Polish People's Republic at that time. The specific modernization, the specificity of this modernization lies in the fact that on the one hand side, we had a very modern law also in regard to women's emancipation. We had well-developed science, for example, also related to women, to women's labor, to women's sexuality. But on the other hand, we had a very conservative society and very conservative Catholic Church that was intensively present in social life. And the mixture of this is important for the development of art of Piniska Bereś in the 1960s. She made direct references to her art, to her life. Here I am showing you two drawings from the artist's archive that are not usually exhibited. And I'm also here showing you two fragments from her commentaries written in 1990s after this Vienna experience, when she started explaining actually what were the sources of her art created in 1960s. And among the sources, she mentioned her childhood and her experience of growing up in a family where with her grandfather, where grandfather was the main person in her family. And as you can see here in this quotation, she remembered that she experienced a lot of condemnation of female sexuality, especially, and that was an experience that she tried to liberate from in the 1960s. And you can see, I like very much this drawing of a woman rotunda, when you can see how she was somehow imprisoned, and it illustrates this feeling of imprisonment, and from which Piniska Bereś tried to liberate herself, and maybe also other women. And I mentioned science, modern science, and sexology. And here I'm showing you a cover of one book that was published by Imieliński in 1965. This book was very, very popular. It had a number of editions in the 60s, and it's just one example of a book which demonstrates how we could say, at least to some extent, the progressive notion of equality of women and men in the domain of sexuality existed in the public discourse in Poland at the same time, at that time. And I want to show you also what can be called examples of or illustrations of socialist sexual revolution as it appeared in the art of male colleagues of Maria Piniska Bereś. So this is just 2-3 examples. Here is a very often shown photo of Nestor of Polish avant-garde, Henryk Berlewi, with several models. From 1966, one miniskirt appeared in the collection of a Polish fashion company. And these photos were to illustrate this appearance of a new trend. And I also choose it just to show you that this fashion, this aspect of a fashion as mini skirts appeared also in socialist Poland. And I think, as Bettina Bereś told me, Maria Piniska Bereś loved wearing minis at that time. And here are two examples of two works exhibited at the subjective photography exhibition in 1968 in Krakow. So I underlined this because Krakow is the city where Piniska Bereś spent all her life. And also I want to show you, underline or turn your attention to Wojciech Plewiński again. This is the photographer that that took photos of her works, but here we can see him as photographing nudes. And this photo of him made by him is very typical for nude photography that developed at that time in Poland. And I will not talk maybe about Zbigniew Turak because we don't have that much time, but I wanted to show you as a point of reference for Pińska-Bereś, and to show you that at the same time when the subjective photography exhibition showed works as exemplified before, Maria Pińska-Bereś did another corset, but this time corset banner, that is a corset transformed into a banner that could be used during a demonstration, but demonstrations like this were not organized in Poland at the time. But she did it in 67, it's dated 67, but she exhibited it in Krakow at the Sculpture of the Year exhibition in 68. So this two different kinds of shows were could be seen in Krakow in 68. And this is the time when she did these tables. So we finally reached the tables. And here definitely we cannot see corsets anymore. We could say that the body is not imprisoned anymore in a corset. It's in a way liberated. It's clearly ostensibly visible in this work, or also in this work when she talks about herself, about a woman that she perceives herself as sexy. But what I want to underline showing these works is that actually they may appear at the first glance a little bit narcissistic when she concentrates on herself, but actually, as you can see clearly, there is what interested her more at that time were intimate relations, and you always see the other person somehow present here. So here you can see this female body lying on a table, but also you can see a place for someone, for a consumer, and also you can see here traces of two hands belonging to someone approaching a table. So it was more interesting for her at that time, this relationship of a woman exposing herself and somehow to whom she exposes herself, but also yes, this the very rich emotional relations. And I will conclude this fragment devoted to Pińska-Bereś with the two photos of the exhibition she had in 1970. It was her first solo exhibition, organized also in Krakow, where some of the works I showed you could be seen, and this exhibition, although it was a first solo exhibition of the artist, it can be perceived as, in a way, culminating this process of liberating her body, liberating her voice, I would say, related to women's experiences, intimate sexual experiences. And also the show is interesting also as experiment, because she did this exhibition as a kind of an environment. So it was not also presenting not traditional sculptures in a not traditional way. I mentioned here Maria Pnińska-Bereś and Jerzy Bereś Foundation because numerous photos I showed you come from this foundation. And as I said, in the second half of my talk, I will concentrate on Magdalena Abakanowicz and Danina Szapocznikow, because I talked with Vibeke and Helga. We exchanged some emails, and they told me that they wanted to present sculpture in an extended field of sculpture, and also they wanted to include artists who are also active beyond Poland. So I am somehow developing these ideas and showing it in what way this notion of Polish artists and traditional conception of sculpture can be destabilized by these artists. And I start with Magdalena Abakanowicz, again the work that is present in the exhibition. But I want to start with from the beginning. What I am showing you is probably the first known project of Magdalena Abakanowicz, made in 1952 when she was a student at the Warsaw Academy of Art at the Department of Textile. And this project was used a couple of years later. And I want to show you also some of her projects made in the second half of the 1950s. When she studied at the Academy of Fine Arts, she specialized in jacquards. I will maybe come back here for a moment. This is a project for a jacquard fabric. But then after graduation, she concentrated more on painted textiles, and she was quite successful in exhibiting them. You can see here one work like this, and here you can see also two of her projects shown at the design exhibition and also reproduced in magazines. A project utilitarian in nature that was to be used in modern apartments at that time in Poland. And the change came, here is a first Magdalena Abakanowicz exhibition, where you can see that she thought about her painted fabrics a little bit as about also paintings, actually. But the change came with Magdalena Abakanowicz joining the artistic textile experimental workshop. It was at the beginning of the 60s. I think it was 59 or 60, I don't remember now exactly. This workshop was run by Maria Łaszkiewicz in her house. And Magdalena Abakanowicz did not have her textile studio at that time, and so she used to work in this workshop specifically. And this is the moment where she started doing where she turned into weaving and started weaving. You can see here one of her first compositions. And it is also in this workshop where she did the first work exhibited at the Lausanne International Tapestry Biennale, that is composition of white forms. And this first Biennale is very important because it is when Polish artists and also artists from some other Eastern European countries were recognized as very innovative, and among them, especially Abakanowicz attracted attention of many critics and curators, and it actually really started her international career, during which she still experimented with waved textiles, and here I am showing you Another work and her participation in some important exhibitions for the development of textile art, exhibitions that presented experimental textiles, the most innovative of that time. And here is a quotation from a text that actually underlines, but I think it's a good quotation to show that Magdalena Abakanowicz indeed was perceived at that time as extending the domain of textiles into a domain of sculpture, and she was very much interested in this, in transforming her textile artworks into a sculpture, and she did it through many different ways. And but in the first half of the 70s, she changed her strategy, we could say, and she started creating sculptural objects. As you can see here, these are first of her sculptural objects, heads and seated figures. What is interesting, here is a kind of introduction to the next lecture. Here we can see that she exhibited them together, the sculptural objects and her textile works, and also that she exhibited the sculptural objects at the tapestry biennales, which I find very interesting, how they actually still were, in the sense of the artwork, they were still perceived as extending the notion of textile. As still experimenting with textiles. And here I show you a fragment of a lecture delivered by Abakanowicz at the Congress Fiber Works, where she talks about the significance of fiber, and again one more work of Abakanowicz at Tapestry Biennale in 79. Abakanowicz claimed that the real change for her came in 1980 when she exhibited her works at the Venice Biennale in the Polish Pavilion. Here you can see a couple of shots, and remembering about this this exhibition. She said, I will read, I don't have it here in the slide, but I will read her sentences. Abakans, that is the textile works, Abakans brought me world fame, but burdened me like a sin that must not be admitted. For practicing weaving closes the door to the art world. I was suddenly discovered in the art world in 1980 when I showed at the Venice Biennale. I am quoting this sentence by Abakanowicz to demonstrate that she really experimented all the time in the domain of textile arts, and that she was somehow not allowed, maybe to leave this field. Not allowed, it's not a good word, but she had problems with leaving this field, and finally when she stopped using fiber, when she stopped weaving, she finally could enter the art world as a sculptor. And for me, this period from which this work exhibited here at the exhibition, that is 73, as far as I remember, is most interesting when she functioned as if in between textile and sculpture. When she wanted to emancipate, to come back to the question, to the word I used in the title of my talk, she wanted to emancipate from design, from textile art, and emancipate to, we could say, to the domain of traditional sculpture, but in this moment she was, as I said, somehow in between. And the final fragment devoted to Alina Szapocznikow. Here again, I start with a work that is that you can see at the exhibition, and I want to start also with this quotation from 68, from one of the texts written by French critic, in which he talks about her as about person who can be met in different places. He mentions Venice Biennale, he mentions Carrara, Paris, Warsaw, and this is very important. I chose this quotation to show her being at different places at that time. And I will not start from the beginning in this case, but rather from her two exhibitions at the beginning of the 60s. Many photographs in this case come from Alina Szapocznikow archive that is available on the website of Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. I'm showing these two exhibitions to demonstrate what kind of sculpture she was working on at that time. And I would like to repeat what I said talking about Maria Binińska-Bereś, that this period in Polish sculpture was considered as experiences a crisis when these modern formulas were considered as not interesting anymore. And actually, Alina Szapocznikow said it herself. So she said that she was tired with this modern abstraction in Polish sculpture, and so her reaction to it was casting body parts. And you can see here two examples. These works have two dates, 62 and 65, because casts were made in 62. But these compositions with casts placed on a stone were made in 65. These works were still made in Warsaw, and they were in a Warsaw studio of Alina Szapocznikow. They stayed in a Warsaw studio when Alina Szapocznikow moved to Paris in 63. And one in Paris, she had two studios in Warsaw and in Paris. And when in Paris, in 66, she visited this exhibition presenting various artistic elaborations on the topic of hand. And she saw this work by César, and she wrote to Poland, to her colleague, that she was really terrified to see that what she did in Poland a couple of years ago is now presented in Paris, and that nobody knows what she did in Poland. It was quite an important moment for her. And she continued with casts in Paris, also living in Paris. And this works were already made in Paris. And from 66, she, as you can see, she started experimenting with design. So she started using casts of her lips in this case, and to produce lamps that could be really used, that could really become part of more contemporary apartments. And she sold them already in 66. For example, she presented one of them as a lamp to be sold. As you can see here, it's on the list with prices here as a 14th position. But she obviously continued with making sculptures, but in a lot of them she she started using this cast of different fragments of her body. She started using light, electric light, and it continued with numerous references to design, even if these works were not design per se. And here I'm showing you two images from the first solo exhibition of Szapocznikow in Paris in '67, when her new works were presented. And this exhibition was to a high extent prepared by Pierre Restané, and Pierre Restané wrote the text. You can see here a cover of a small catalog. And what this text underlines is that in her new works, she, we could say, emancipated herself or liberated herself from the horrors of the past, but her works were also often considered as from the horrors of the past. Let's stay with this. These works were also shown in Warsaw the same year at the Zachęta National Gallery. But here the exhibition was slightly different, because here her new works were exhibited together with her older works. So these works, so here, although the text by Restané was repeated as well in the Warsaw catalog, here we can see that the Polish curators or organizers of the exhibition actually did not want to concentrate only on new experiments of Szapocznikow in the sculpture, but also wanted to still demonstrate what she did before. And the reception of this exhibition in Warsaw was very cold. There were not many reviews written, and many curators later said that they did not understand the experiments that Szapocznikow did in Paris. They did not appreciate at all these lamps and design aspects of this work. They thought that it's kitschy, that it's actually, it means betraying the true art, it means betraying high art. And so she really did not experience, I would say, a warm welcome of her new works, her Paris works in Warsaw. And this was the last exhibition of Szapocznikow in Poland. She kept her Polish studio until '69. In '69, she left she moved from her studio, and in '69 she visited Poland for the last time. And we can talk about different reasons for this. Some people say, among them me, about anti-Semitism that developed in Poland in '68. About her illness, she was diagnosed with cancer in '69, but also I think that this lack of understanding for her experiments was also important in this context. So back in Paris, we could say she continued with her experiments, and she was still interested with developing her design projects. She wanted to produce not only lamps, but she also had an idea of producing cushions, and also she wanted to do some chairs. I am showing here one letter from extended exchange with one of the companies that was to produce these works. It was not quite successful, but she attempted to do it, and her works appeared in different design contexts. Also, when it became clear that she is not able to liberate herself completely from traumas and horrors, mainly because of her illness, and she started introducing aspects of her negative or traumatic and tragic experiences of her body, body, when she started introducing it to her works again, she continued with this design projects. And you can see here, for example, a table made in 72. Under the table, I hope you can see it, under the table there is a head, and it's a head that belongs to this work, where Przepoczników directly talks about her experiences with illness, experiences with illness. And so what in this case, thinking, just coming to the conclusion, although I don't have any very clear conclusion, in this case, in the case of Alina Szapocznikow, experiments, sculptural experiments with introduction of new materials, new modern materials, and her cooperation with design sector can be obviously considered from as some sort of emancipation or liberation from traumas, as she saw, as Restane wrote about it, and as she saw it herself. But also, what I wanted to show with this short presentation, I wanted to underline that for her it also meant somehow liberation from Poland, in the sense that, as I said, her new works were not well received in Poland, and she continued developing them in France. I don't know of any example of her attempts of selling these works in Poland, or somehow introducing it to design producers in Poland. So developing these experiments also meant for her distancing herself from Polish art world, and for understanding of art in Poland. So to conclude, or rather to leave this conclusion somehow open, I titled my talk Emancipatory Language of Sculpture, but this is a very general phrase, and by this general phrase and these 3 case studies, I wanted to show that this emancipation that I perceived in artistic language, that is emancipation either from academic sculpture, or from textile, or from art to design, goes into very different directions. In the case of these 3 artists, sometimes contradictory directions. Sometimes it's a emancipation from sculpture to design, as in the case of Szapocznikow. But in the case of Abakanowicz, it's exactly the other way around. And obviously, I also wanted to show this. I perceive this emancipation of language, of artistic language, so always related with some other kinds of emancipations, but sometimes related to women's experiences, sometimes more to other kinds of bodily experiences, or even emancipation from a certain milieu in which one functions. And that would be all. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Agata Jakubowska. I really appreciated how you anchored these artists in their specific historical and societal contexts, and showing us how they developed their practices from very different and individual starting points, and how they emancipated from patriarchy, maybe from a medium or from a specific way of creating art, or even from nationality, or So we have time for questions. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask Agata a question, raise your hand. Maybe we need to warm up a little bit. I have, maybe you can, Agata, comment a little bit on, you ended your talk saying how some parts of Alina Shaposhnikov's works were not appreciated in Poland. When and how did her artistic practice start to become appreciated again in Poland? Could you say something about that? I don't think she was rediscovered,
yes,
but
obviously. The first, when I said that she was not, her experiments with design, let's put it simply this way, were not appreciated in the 60s, yes, in 67 and in the following years. But the situation started to change when Shapochnikov passed away in 73. And exhibition of her works, monographic exhibition of her works was prepared and traveled around Poland in 75. And then many reviewers, many art historians wrote texts in which they said that they admitted that we did not understand these new works, that we found them narcissistic a little bit, and as I said, kitschy. But now we see them in a different light. Now we see them in the context of Alina Shapochnikov's illness. Now we see them as made by a woman who still suffered, but suffered in a different way. So we could say that her illness, mortal illness, actually somehow convinced art critics in Poland in the 70s. Somehow they could, for them it was too difficult to perceive these works as just, I don't know, attractive, attractive, beautiful, I don't know, used in this context of design. But when they saw them as works made by a suffering woman, then it was again okay, somehow, yes, acceptable. It became again acceptable. So this is, I think it's a very interesting process in the reception of artworks somehow, but at that time Polish artwork was not really open to design, I would say, as such.
had something
to cooperation with design.
Had something changed also in the art scene in the 70s in Poland?
Yes, obviously. Generally speaking, the 70s are considered, especially the first half of the 70s, are considered as a period where popular culture developed more intensively and consumer culture developed more intensively, and there was a bigger interest in this popular culture, but it was not that strong as, for example, in Hungary. I think if we think about Eastern European countries, then the pop art could develop much stronger in Hungary than in Poland. So I don't think that this changes in the artwork were crucial here. I think the more that personal history of Shapochnikov played a crucial role.
Thank you. Any other questions now that we have Agata with us? Yes, Klara.
Hi, Agata. Thank you. The Violet Orchidee is violet orchid is such an amazing work, and I wondered. And it's so it's still quite shocking, I think, in a way. It's huge and very sexually explicit, and I suppose you didn't talk about that straight on. I wondered what was written about it when it was first shown, and whether people dared to talk about it.
Yes, I did not talk about it, although I wanted. I forgot about it. Not about this specific work, because I don't know much about this specific work. So I don't know how this work was commented. But again, here with other works made by Abakanowicz at that period, the end of the 60s and beginning of the 70s, they have a lot of very direct references to female body. It's not only this one work, but there are more Abakans like this. And again, we need to differentiate Polish reception and reception in other countries, because in Poland it was ignored completely, this aspect of her works, and it was not commented at all. It was the same was the case with Maria Pinińska-Bereś, that the sexuality of her works were not commented directly. So it was said that okay, it's about women, but not they did not go deeper into the content of this work. And but this feminine quality of Abakanowicz's work was noticed by, for example, American critics and American artists, also feminist artists. Abakanowicz had a solo exhibition at the beginning of the 70s in California, and she also participated in a group exhibition of textile works at that time, and I read some reviews and also comments of people visiting these exhibitions, that they recognize immediately that it's about actually women's sexuality and women's body, and so but we can talk about completely two different discourses about her works, and also I think that it's quite interesting exactly to notice that it was in this period, at the turn of the 60s, 70s, that her works are most I would like to say feminist, but feminine, yes, it's feminine, with the direct references to feminine body and feminine experiences. And I think that we can actually relate it to, we can see it parallel to Pinińska-Bereś. So it was the same. They can also be, they were created in Poland. They were created in Poland in Warsaw. And so I can also I think that we can see them also as examples of socialist sexual revolution. Yes, so both artists would be examples that existed in art, but not necessarily in the reception of his art.
Thank you very much. We are moving on in our program. Thank you for joining us, Agata Jakubowska. Thank you for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you very much. I really regret not being with you, and have a good time.
Thank you.
Then we will move on. It's a great pleasure. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Caroline Ugelstad, who is the Chief Curator and Director of Collections and Exhibitions at Henie Onstad Art Center in Oslo. Ugelstad has a degree in art history from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London and a PhD in art history from the University of Oslo. She has curated numerous exhibitions within the field of contemporary art and modernism.
Recently, she was one of the curators of the touring Magdalena Abakanowicz exhibition, Every Tangle of Thread and Rope, which was shown at Henie Onstad Kunstsenter last year. In her paper, Caroline will look at the connections between Poland and Norway within the field of textile. Please welcome Caroline.
Ja. God morgen, eller god formiddag. I am very happy to be here. As Vibece said, I had the very great pleasure to curate the Magdalena Abakanowicz exhibition at Henie Onstad. Is it 1 year ago? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Time moves fast. And in the course of that work, I became interested in this history that relates Norwegian textile art in the 1960s and the 1970s to Poland. And this history is also very embedded at Henie Onstad, where I work every day. So that's the point of departure for my interest in this. In 1963, the then 24-year-old Britt Fuglevåg, which is the lady there, today one of Norway's central textile artists, she traveled to Poland and to the Art Academy in Warsaw to study under an exchange grant from the Foreign Ministry Department in Norway. Shortly after, Fuglevåg's colleague, Siri Blakstad, she followed. And she started to study at the Art Academy in Warsaw in 1964. And then she went back 1 year after to study in the studio of Magdalena Abakanowicz in 1966. This happened shortly after an until then unknown group of Polish artists had had their breakthrough at the first International Tapestry Biennale in Lausanne in 1962. And we heard a little about that in the previous lecture. This was an unknown group of 5 Polish artists that presented a body of work that was acclaimed for its expressive powers and originality. This group, coming from the Polish Fine Arts Academy, became known in Lausanne as the Polish Tapestry School. Their adaptation to new forms and new materials became a catalyst for a new tapestry language, which quickly became known as the tapestry of tomorrow, or the new tapestry. And in this paper, I want to look closer into the practices of Fuglevåg and Blakstad from the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s through the lens of the cross-border contacts between Polish and Norwegian tapestry art. Both Fuglevåg and Blakstad, they traveled to Poland right after the breakthrough of the Polish Tapestry School in 1962, and they brought key impulses home to Norway. At the same time, both artists broke with what can be said to be the dominant or even national weaving style in Norway at the beginning of the 1960s. But then Poland was not only a travel and study destination for Norwegian artists during the Cold War. Polish artists were also presented in major exhibitions in Norway at institutions such as the Museum of Art and Design in Oslo and Henie Onstad Kunstsenter in Bærum. So I will also mention some of these exhibitions shortly. And this is to say then that the contacts between the two nations, Poland and Norway, were close in the 1960s and the 1970s. In the historiography of Norwegian textile art, this contact is well known. And it's also acknowledged in the reception of textile art in the 1960s and 1970s. But I think that is precisely why it is particularly interesting to investigate what space is given to this transnational contact in Norwegian art history as such, or in the canonized narrative, such as, for example, in the overview work, Norges kunsthistorie, or Norwegian art history, which is the canon, in a way. And a study like this is to cast light on where modern art happened in the 1960s and the 1970s, and to question and perhaps nuance the established Norwegian historical narrative about the spaces and locations, or the flows and exchanges that contributed to form modern art in Norway in the 1960s and the 1970s. It is a question of the art geography influencing Norwegian art during the Cold War, at the same time as it is a question of art historiography and how these contacts have been understood in Norwegian art history writing. In his book Art and Democracy in Post-Communist Europe, the Polish art historian Piotr Piotrowski calls for a need to conduct horizontal art history. Instead of talking about a peripheral art scene that adopts models from a leading art center, for example, Paris or New York, which he claims characterize the dominant vertical art history of writing, and one could add the dominant Norwegian art historical writing. Art history needs to be written horizontally, he states. Where models and ideas from other regions outside the West play together with the local art scene in a specific historical period with particular cultural traditions, socio-political context, and institutional systems. This means to look at the periphery and draw on the studies of the art margins to revise both the history of art produced within the center and the world history of modern art written from that perspective. And I think this is important in this material. As one can understand, in the period, Poland and Norway, as well as the medium of textile art, as semi-peripheries. Okay. The leading weaving art tradition in Norway in the mid-1960s were dominated by Atelier Norsk Billedvev. Atelier Norsk Billedvev existed between 1951 and 1967, and it was managed by this lady, Else Halling. From Atelier Norsk Billedvev, several quality tapestries were woven, adhering to plant-dyed spelsau wool, and I don't know the word spelsau in English, with great rigor, working in clear, flat style, and using carton painted by modern Norwegian painter, such as Håkon Stenstavold and Aksel Revold. And we see one example of this here. This was the national approach to weaving in Norway at the time, a distinctive Norwegian tapestry tradition which influenced a generation of Norwegian weavers. However, it was there were, Hanna Ryggen and Synnøve Anker Aurdal. They acted independently to this tradition. And they showed young weavers around 1960s that they did not have to follow this sort of national path. However, it was the first tapestry biennale in Lausanne in 1962 that clearly demonstrated something different and how tapestry could be used. And this was also the case for Norway, that one sought inspiration from this Lausanne Biennale. When Fuglevåg traveled to Poland in 1963, she attended the school for traditional Gobelin. At the same time as she studied painting and composition. Shortly after her stay in Poland, she had her debut at Høstutstillingen, the autumn exhibition in 1965, with the tapestry Composition. And unfortunately, I didn't find an image of it, but these are other examples from this time. Composition was an abstract composition in natural colored wool. The tapestry had a rough and uneven surface, and the artist used a mixture of weaving techniques, which created a tension in the surface. And the work caused a stir among the critics visiting the exhibition. There were no figurative motifs in flat style, no use of plant dyes, no use of spelsau wool. A completely un-Norwegian, yes, national carpet, and that even more by an unknown debutante. Textile historian Hjørdis Standbolt claimed in 1979. Attention was given to the expressive qualities of the textile itself, such as the coloristic variations and the tensions in the texture of the surface. The warp, altså renningen, the weft, islette, the fiber and the materials used. In composition and other works, Fuglevåg was concerned with creating not a two-dimensional surface, but a surface which was in dialogue with the space around the textile and with spatial effects. Therefore, Fuglevåg stated herself, she approached her tapestries not primarily as a flat surface, but as a surface in space. Fuglevåg's early tapestries from 1965 Nå skjedde noe på skjermen her. Et øyeblikk. Sånn, kanskje. Den bare går ikke videre. Der. Ja. Fuglevåg's early tapestries from 1965 and towards the end of the 1960s were rectangular and without any relief effects, but with a clearly uneven and fiber-rich surface. And you can see some examples of it here. She wove her first sisal tapestry in the Alps in 1966 without a loom, but by pulling threads between the trees. Yet, it was not towards 1970 that we encountered the tapestries that we know today as distinctively Fuglevågs. Irregular shapes in rougher techniques, closed shapes and open gaps. An example is Form 1, which is hanging now at the National Museum in the collection exhibition. Here the materials are no longer wool, but sisal, hemp and jute, rough materials that are well suited to large shapes. Siri Blakstad made her debut at Høstutstillingen in 1966, 1 year after Fuglevåg. And as Fuglevåg, she also made a stir, and she received the newspaper Morgenbladets prize for the tapestry that she presented, called Poland. And this was acquired right after by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway. The rectangular and abstract tapestry was woven from materials such as wool, hemp, sisal, linen, nylon, and silk cords. And the uneven textile surface is again characteristic. The tapestry was woven on a loom in Magdalena Abakanovich's weaving studio, with whom Blakstad, as I said, studied with during her second stay in Poland. It was in Poland that I found my form of expression. I feel related to modern Polish visual art, Blakstad stated, in a conversation with Bonit in 1967. She added, "This applies primarily to the form that Magdalena Abakanovic, the textile artist, who is a professor at the experimental department in Poznan, is an exponent for." In keeping with Fuglevåg's debut a year before, also Poland, the tapestry, emphasizes the materials of the textile and the textile expression itself. Characteristic of Blakstad's tapestries at this time are the bold combinations of different materials, the relief effects on the surface, and the interest in materials such as metal and chain, as well as in collaborating with architecture to make public textile work that could form a natural part of the space it was included in. After the success with Poland, Blakstad became a part of a traveling Norwegian exhibition in Germany and in London, where she was included in the exhibition Modern Art in Norway, together with Synnøve Anker Aurdal and Hanna Ryggen. This led to an invitation to teach tapestry at the Royal College of Art in London, where she eventually built up and headed the Department of Tapestry in the 1970s. The tapestry Fjell, Hav og By, Mountain, Sea and City from 1974, which Siri Blakstad made to the City Hall in Mo i Rana, was woven in London. It's a very bad image, but I got it from the City Hall. And unfortunately, there are not many images of Siri Blakstad's work from this period, so they're a little difficult to find. And this shows how colors and synthetic fibers had entered her work. It is woven in plastic, nylon, and wool, at the same time as colors are strong and bright in the landscape composition. A crucial reason for that we can even talk about the Polish presence in Norwegian art history in the 1960s and the 1970s is the fact that Poland and Norway entered into a cultural agreement in 1958, which resulted in frequent visits by Polish musicians to Norway and exhibitions of, amongst other, Polish textile art. After years of cultural oppression under the Stalinist regime, authorities in Poland changed their mode of action in the second half of the 1950s and started to encourage artistic freedom, particularly when artists presented their work outside the country. These measures, Marta Kowalewska has stated, were intended to improve the image of the system that Western democracies condemned. Polish initiatives in Norway were shown with aid from the Polish Ministry of Culture, the Polish Embassy in Oslo, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Cultural Office in Norway. Cultural agreements such as this were entered into as part of the Allied countries' plans for the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War. In Norway, this gave rise to several similar agreements, first with countries in Western Europe and then also with Eastern European states. Except for earlier Yugoslavia, Poland was the Eastern European country with which Norway had the most extensive relation, particularly in the period around 1955 to 1965 and in the 1970s. Polish cultural initiatives that took place in Norway during these years must be seen in relation to this agreement. As an example, at Henie Onstad Kunstsenter, the exhibition Polish or Meet Polish Culture in 1971 was shown. An exhibition with Tadeusz Kantor was shown in 1976. Polish posters in 1982, and 3 pioneers in the Polish avant-garde in 1986. In addition to the exhibition Organic Structures, Magdalena Abakanowicz in 1977. Particularly relevant to my presentation is the exhibition Moderne Polsk Billedvev, Modern Polish Tapestry, presented at Kunstindustrimuseet or the Arts and Crafts Museum in Oslo in 1965. The same year that Fuglevåg made her debut at Høstutstillingen. The exhibition was part of a series of exhibitions with Polish tapestry traveling through Europe, including Germany, Austria, Holland, Switzerland, Sweden, and Norway. The exhibition displayed the new Polish school of textile, with artists such as Magdalena Abakanowicz, Sofia, and sorry for my spelling, Butrymovich, and Wojciech Sadly. 2 years after Moderne Polsk Billedvev, Kunstindustrimuseet displayed a solo exhibition with Magdalena Abakanowicz, traveling to, this is images from Moderne Polsk Billedvev, and this one. This is from Magdalena Abakanowicz, the exhibition Woven Works at the Arts and Crafts Museum in Oslo in 1967. And this exhibition was realized upon an invitation by the Norwegian art historian Alf Bø, at this time chief curator at Kunstindustrimuseet or the Arts and Crafts Museum in Oslo, and later director at the Munch Museum. He went to see the Lausanne Biennale that we already have heard about in 1962, and he was very impressed by the work that Magdalena Abakanowicz presented there, called Composition of White Forms, and there was an image of that in the other presentation. The work had, according to Bø, an unusually rich texture. He remarked upon the spontaneous expression that Abakanowicz had achieved by weaving without using a carton, and he noted the absence of the smooth surface in the artist's work. The technique is rough and the carpets are far from flawless. The surface bulge and the weave is uneven. Yet the composition and color of these tapestries work together with an expression that is embedded in the texture of the material itself, so that we are, to some extent, facing compositions in material, he wrote. According to Bø, these were lush works with great uniqueness. They mean something new in the great European tapestry tradition and have given artists from other weaving countries something to think about, he said. Arbeider I Vev, this exhibition, presented 26 works primarily made between 1966 and 1967, mounted on the wall like large paintings. Then 10 years, this is images from this exhibition. And then 10 years later, Abakanowicz opened a new exhibition at Henie Kunstsenter called Organic Structures. This exhibition included 58 works by Abakanowicz made in between 1967 and 1977. And the extraordinary thing is that within 10 years between these two exhibitions, the Norwegian audience could actually witness the surprising and powerful development of Abakanowicz's work in these years, moving from two-dimensional hanging works to the abakans, these works hanging in the space, three-dimensional works. The exhibition's interplay between the artworks and the architecture was deemed particularly successful in this exhibition. Some critics called the artistic quality and the innovation of the works into question in Norway. Others declared Abakanowicz's work as an earthquake in the visual arts, which had created a set of unforeseen and new dimensions. Importantly, these exhibitions arrived at a very important time in Norwegian textile history. They gained a broad reception, and they have had an afterlife in Norwegian art historical writing. The Norwegian art historical canon from 1940s through to the 1980s is, amongst other, defined in volume 7 of Norges kunsthistorie, Norwegian art history, in I en ny tid, into a new era. The volume's separate chapters are divided by media: architecture, painting, graphic art, sculpture, arts and crafts, and industrial design. And I'm sure you know the book, many of you here. When textile art is mentioned, it is as part of the chapter on painting and as part of the chapters on arts and crafts. In the chapter on painting, its author, Hans Jacob Brun, explains that shifts from handicrafts to visual arts have placed textile artists in a difficult transitional situation for many years. This has had to do with organization, which organizations they should belong to, which museums should collect their works, which professional juries they should be judged by. The editors of Norway's art history have chosen to treat this field under both crafts and painting, where the guideline for the division has been the general characters of the individual works and the artist's stated intentions. And I have to jump a little because you say I have 5 minutes left, Vibece. Yeah. The only textile artists mentioned in the chapter on paintings are Hanne Ryggen and Siri Anker Aurdal. Other textile artists, such as Fuglevåg and Blakstad, are referred to in the chapter on arts and crafts on an equal footing with media such as ceramics, jewelry, and glass. When reading through Norway's art history, it is therefore difficult to see that textile art is primarily treated as visual art. The volume appears still to reflect the transitional situation textile art found itself in during these years in the 1960s and the 1970s in Norway, between being understood as fine art and as arts and craft, or clearly tied to a handicraft. Volume 7 of Norway's art history was issued only 6 years after Norske Tekstilkunstnere, Norwegian textile artists, the organization for Norwegian textile artists, was formed in 1977. And this organization, of course, worked intensely to obtain full recognition for textile art as an independent art form at the time. And for them to be acquired not by the Museum of Arts and Design in Oslo, but by the National Gallery. That's what they really fought for. In Norwegian art history, Britt Fuglevåg is referred to as a marked break with the Norwegian tradition, and as a representative of the development that took place in Norwegian textile art in the 1960s, where material and technique became direct expressions, and where textiles were explored as a separate artistic medium. Fuglevåg is mentioned in connection with the innovative Polish textile art at the time, with Magdalena Abakanowicz at the forefront. Fuglevåg's stay at the Art Academy of Fine Art in Warsaw is also found important, where she gained a completely new perception of textiles as a separate artistic medium. And where she also under that influence, her tapestries became three-dimensional and responded to the space, such as in, for example, Huldra from 1970. And Siri Blakstad is also mentioned in Norway's art history as a representative of the new way of working with textiles. And the tapestry Poland was a tribute to the expressive power of textile materials, it is said. This tapestry is mentioned as a natural point of reference for what was happening in Norwegian textile art at the end of the 1960s, both because artists traveled to Poland, but also because several Polish exhibitions were presented at museums, as we've seen. At the same time, abstract paintings' interest in form and material issues also made it natural for textile artists to step into a more liberated textile expression, it is stated. The conclusion in Norway's art history is that the direct impact of Polish avant-gardism on Norwegian textiles was not long-lasting, but that it was important for a new attitude towards textiles as an artistic medium. And one of the reasons given in Norway's art history to why the textile artists did not follow up on the free fiber work on the continent is that a number of them were instead involved in political work in various ways. This involvement required a more figurative expression parallel to what was happening in the visual arts, it is stated. Mid-1960s and mid-1970s were very important years during the struggle to transform the understanding and categorization of woven object as mere craft rather than fine art. A new radical feminism, a new radical feminism and a time of political change helped pave the way. Yet, in the canonized narrative about Norwegian art, textile art clearly exists in the periphery to, for example, abstract painting. And that's in a very fast way I've tried to demonstrate a little to you. Moreover, it is worth noting that the strong Polish presence during these years is seen as so short-lived. And in my further research into this material, I want to see if it's possible to turn the history a little bit around and look further into if there is reason to say that the non-figurative experimental tapestry that Fuglevåg and Blakstad worked with at this time did not only evolve in a separate textile sphere or was influenced by painterly expressions, but if it might be that they also, and their colleagues, influenced other art histories in turn. Moreover, it is interesting to investigate further what I find that this research material has shown thus far, that Norway was made up of horizontal relations between geographical axes crisscrossing the presumed Cold War divide, complicating the attempt to write art history only from a center. And then I wanted to end with a photograph of Siri Blakstad, where she is dressed up as the feminist icon Georges Sand, and you can find it on the internet as a trail to that further research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for a very interesting paper that you gave. I'm really happy that you are going to expand and write an essay about this that will come out later. It is very fascinating when these connections are opened up and also put more into perspective. It is definitely a chapter that is not so easy to get knowledge of, so thank you very much for that. And then I wanted to ask the audience if there are anyone who have any questions.
It was very, very interesting to listen to you. And I have no questions, but I want to say that I was a student in that time, in the 60s and beginning of the 70s. And we have a professor called Magne Malmanger, and he was very, very dedicated to these women doing this. So I felt it was like just old times came into me again. So thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. That was very nice to hear. Any other questions? Yes, one over there.
Thank you, Caroline. That was just wonderful to hear this story. I was just wondering, I mean, there are many things we could talk about. I was just wondering if you could say, you talked about how the textile arts were placed in the canon of Norwegian art history. I was just wondering about the narrative about Fuglevåg and Blakstad, if you've been looking into how they are treated. Because Fuglevåg often sort of represents this Polish influence. And how is she only treated as Polish? How is this materiality understood, and how is her relation to the other textile artists seen? Because I think there are some things, anything material becomes Polish, but I think there's also this modernist tendency in Synnøve Anker who sort of takes up the Polish idea, but it also comes from new ways of thinking textile in Norway, whether it is Polish or Norwegian or Nordic or where it comes from. Could you just say something more about this, about Fuglevåg and Blakstad? And Blakstad has somehow disappeared from Norwegian art history. What happened to her and her career? How do you see that?
Yeah, Blakstad, as I said, she moved to London and she built up the textile study at Royal College of Art. So I think that's why she disappeared, actually. That she didn't weave that much. But as I said, it's also very difficult to find information about her, images from her work, and also I think her archive burnt, so she doesn't have much herself. But I'm working on this. Your question, well. Yes.
It didn't have there was a Polish influence, but it didn't have very much influence.
Yes.
So it died. And I think that's not true.
Yeah.
I think it didn't die. I think textile art was transformed and sort of being focused only on this influence from Poland. And then when Britt Fuglevåg starts doing something else, the sort of influence from Poland dies.
Yes.
But I don't think that's what happens. I think it's a much more complex influence that transformed textile art. Yeah. So we have to think about it. I'm just asking you if you can think about it in a more hybrid way, sort of contest the canonical idea that the influence comes and then goes away. Yeah. Because it meets other influences, the cultural exchange between Poland and Norway, and then the influences from the women's movement and the rethinking of textile art in general and the political work. I think it's much more complex. Yeah. And I was hoping that,
No, I
we
totally
could reflect on
agree
that,
with it, and I think that's what we. I say we because we work on the same research project. We have to look into that, and also, of course, question what is the Polish influence more, or nuance that much more also, and it is surprising how. Norges kunsthistorie just says this was short-lived and then we are done with it. So I definitely think that one has to investigate that further and to see how what effects it had in a much more nuanced way.
Yeah, and I think you did that wonderfully by reading the sort of materiality of the works and how that explores itself, and then the influence doesn't disappear because exploring materiality is something that continues. Yeah. So it's a matter of how you see influence, as you said, and sort of this transnational idea of horizontal art history. It becomes much more interesting because then you can see it as a transformative force that doesn't die. It just takes on different shapes. Yeah, it's more what I
A last question here.
I don't have any question. I just wanted to thank you for this wonderful presentation, and having Poland as an image here. I would like to suggest that it would be maybe great to have Norwegian textile exhibition in Poland.
Yeah. Good idea.
That's a very good idea. I completely agree with you. Then yes, but yeah. And then the last question up here. Yep, then I think we should move on. Yep. Thank you, Caroline. So we are moving forward. with the last speaker of this session. We are very proud to have Klara Kemp-Welch here. Kemp-Welch is a reader in 20th century modernism at the Courtauld Institute of Art at the University of London, where she works on modern and contemporary art from Eastern Europe. She is the author of several books that are considered essential reading in the field, including Networking the Block, Experimental Art in Eastern Europe from 1965 to 1981. She is currently completing a monograph entitled Free Movement, Migration and Mobility in Eastern Europe through the Lens of Contemporary Art. In the paper she will present here, she will explore how artists in the exhibition use their sculptural practices to challenge psychological and political obstacles and to question restrictions on their creativity. Please, Klara, the floor is yours.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for this warm introduction. I wanted to begin by saying thank you to Vibece and to Helga for inviting me, and to the director Hanne for hosting me here. I'm really happy to be able to address this topic because it's been selfishly useful for me as a researcher to return to some work that I did a while ago on the 60s and 70s, but have been thinking about a bit less recently. As was mentioned, I'm currently writing about contemporary art and migration. And it made me think about that work from the perspective of my current interests. So it may be a little bit strange what I try to do in this talk. It's maybe a little bit experimental, but it made me realize that this question of migration and of borders is actually very pertinent and present also to the work of this period. And that's what I really want to look at. In my paper, which is called From Resilient Objects to Performative Boundaries. And I wanted to say one more thing before I forget, because the title of the exhibition, Plastic Art, I was so happy to read this Euro-English. Okay, this is completely incomprehensible 20 years ago to an English-speaking art world audience, and now I think nobody would blink if you say plastic art. But it's very francophone, you know, les arts plastiques, and as translating Polish material from the historical avant-garde for a long time with my mother. And my mother always said, no, Klara, you can't use plastic art. That's not translating. That's not English. And I was like, okay, well, so what do we call it? And we translated it as visual art, which doesn't capture at all this plastic quality. It was a stupid way to translate it. So thank you for your Euro-English. Let there be more Euro-English, and it's a good thing. The international English, I am a big proponent of this. So traditional assumptions about sculpture were being subjected to the most radical of overhauls by artists around the world in what we could call the long 1960s. Alina Szapocznikoff's remarkable use of new materials brought a particular literalness to the idea of plastic art. Melting, pouring and casting industrial plastics such as latex, polyester and polyurethane, materials that were subject to the processes of entropy in ways that more traditionally noble materials were not. Szapocznikoff built temporality into the fabric of her sculptures, which resonate with the precarity, pain, and possibility of pleasure in bodily experience. Szapocznikoff wrote in 1972 that her work was concerned with undefined sensations, and that she sought, I quote, to capture the fleeting moments of life of the body, its paradoxes and absurdity. She saw the body as being the most vulnerable of impermanent phenomena. She called it the source of all joy, pain, and truth, as something that was, perhaps paradoxically, wholly ungraspable at the level of consciousness. My paper takes some of the questions raised by one of Shapochnikov's provocative resin sculptures as a starting point for thinking about how women artists worked in the expanded field to materialize and to challenge different boundaries they faced in their working lives. Shapochnikov's academic training had been at the Academy of Applied rather than Fine Arts in Prague, where she enrolled after having been liberated from Terezin, 30 miles north of the city in 1945. And her lamp sculpture, this one, there are many, blurs the boundaries between fine and applied art. It is a functional object. If it is a functional object, it also sheds light on how Shapochnikov's resilient challenge, it also sheds light on Shapochnikov's resilient challenge to the male-dominated history of sculpture. Her sensual lamp is composed of two equally, although differently, excessive elements. The lower of these is a rugged grey clay, like erect phallus, positioned as though protruding from a prone body, gently curved, emerging from what may be a pubic mound or the suggestion of an abdomen. The textured stand appears to merge with the earth, receding in death, or rising in a final gesture to try to give new life. It's like an oversized stem or trunk. But for all its solidity, there's also something precarious and unsettlingly vulnerable in the imperfection of the form, which renders it human rather than superhuman, despite its scale. It is one of Shapochnikov's objets maladroits, awkward objects, fragile, exquisite, and a little clumsy. The upper part of the sculpture seems too fragile to touch. The only way to move the lamp is to grasp the phallus firmly, if not to caress it in an erotic movement. To touch it is inevitably to become implicated, a co-producer of its libidinal charge. But it is also presumably a calculated shock, for it is cold and rigid, dead. Its length begins to recall that of a bone. Its curve suggests that of a rib. We think of the biblical story of the creation of Eve from the rib of Adam, so that the two might be companions in the Garden of Eden. These intimate companions are conjoined. The cast of a female face, the artist's, she had begun casting plastic body parts increasingly deployed like death masks in 1965, is also a fragment, for it reveals only the area below the nose. Elegant cheeks, a perfectly formed mouth with red lips, slightly pursed, and a shapely chin, resting not on a hand, as in Auguste Rodin's The Thinker, but in the same attitude, equally pensively, on the tip of the eager phallus below. This morbid stem, striving upwards out of the ground, encouraged by the lips, eventually bursts into flower. It is topped by a glass candy rendering of 4 deliciously bright balls of delicately flavored sorbet. This final flourish is what first draws the eye to the piece, illuminated by a discreetly concealed light bulb. The versatile polyester resin makes the form of a precious set of rose and yellow tinted petal forms. These are angelic in their choreography, evoking both a halo and a set of wings in motion, or a fan of color filters for a camera lens, giving the work a cinematic quality. By contrast with the delights above, the phallus appears no more than a remnant. Its drab form cannot compete with the excess of radiance it supports, and neither does it try to. The colored elements grow like a delightful fungus from a tree stump, nourished by its support. The enticing sugary shards almost ridicule the support, so clearly outshining the phallus. The sculpture teases rather than avenges. True, the shard-like petals might threaten to drop and to slice like small guillotines through both the pretty lips and the fleshy phallus, but they do not. They seem instead to float protectively above, like exotic birds, giving their blessing to the delicate play of the chin and the glands of the phallus below. Shapochnikov acknowledges the power of the phallus, but takes advantage of its support, using it as a base from which to flourish in new and spectacular ways, just as her sculptural experimentation with synthetic plastics built on her artistic training with traditional materials. Referenced here by the clay-like form below. The male and female elements seem to operate in harmony, the phallus supporting and raising up the shattered female element, which rests there with confidence, and in return delivers the gentlest of erotic pleasures to the awkward object straining below, providing it with a physical extension and more than a touch of style. Shapochnikov's lamp sculpture materializes the idea of an art object as something that sheds light on a situation, that helps us to better see, and by extension to understand, what might otherwise go unseen without the light that it shines on the situation. Male and female elements work to make their case together in my next case study too. Kwiekulik's Monument Without a Passport. Performed at the All-Polish Biennial of Youth Art in Sopot in October 1978, it was a response to the state's refusal a month earlier to issue the artists with passports to participate in an international artists' meeting in Arnhem in the Netherlands. The couple had spent many months preparing for the so-called behavior workshop there, an experimental interdisciplinary event modeled on workshops at Joseph Beuys Free International University at the 1977 Documenta 6, only to be informed not long before the opening that their passport applications had been refused. In a letter of appeal to the passport office, Kwiekulik explained that the prestigious invitation was the culmination of many years of concerted effort to build up their reputation and ought to be considered a success for Polish art. They wrote that non-attendance would be financially catastrophic for them personally, as they badly needed the fees that they would receive for the trip to purchase equipment for future work, concluding by remarking that they intended to give the Arnhem organizers. Okay, great, perfect. Does that work okay? Great. Saying that they intended to give the Arnhem organizers an honest account of the reasons for their non-attendance, and thereby implying that the state's violation of their post-1975 post-Helsinki Agreement right to travel would arouse international condemnation, to no avail. The blacklisted sculptors had to content themselves with attending a youth festival in Sopot. It was an invitation that they had initially marked for the trash. Early notes refer to the piece as a monument to bureaucratic hatred, explaining that a monument cannot travel because it does not have a passport. While other objects have passports, they said, one object, the monument, does not. Monuments do not travel, so why should they have passports? A living person as a monument can't move, can't travel. These are their notes. The circular logic of their stream of consciousness musings tried and failed to make sense of the mechanics of socialist bureaucracy. The photograph I'm showing here shows the culmination of an elaborate performance carried out by the artists, which entailed recounting how they had been blacklisted by the authorities following the publication of a work by Kwiek entitled Dick Man, a portrait of the Minister of Culture, which he did as a student, and alongside the Polish emblem of the eagle in their studio, one of the commissions that they were working on as part of their day-to-day hack work, which was published in a Swedish catalogue by curators from Malmö and was considered offensive by the authorities. The artist's side of the story was only revealed to one half of the audience, though, while the other half were treated to a slideshow of an official summer meeting for young sculptors at Legnica in 1971, combined with audio playing English language lessons for beginners. The official images of collaboration between industry art and socialist youth, paired with the English lessons, were an awkward pairing, potentially ridiculing the provincialism of the Polish People's Republic's cultural scene. What happened next was that Kwiek made a rectangular mound around Kulik's feet, and he poured in plaster, placing her in the situation of a double bind, with her head in a table, mimicking primitive methods of public humiliation, such as the stocks, and her feet rooted to the ground. Once everyone had waited for the plaster to dry, Kwiek revealed Kulik's feet encased in plaster and her conversion into a monument with the prerequisite solid base. Kulik was then carried onto a podium and her base joined to another base housing the legs of a chair. She held aloft a folder marked Ideas for Arnhem. Kwiek unveiled a sign reading "Monument without a passport" in the salons of visual art. The artists remained immobile in front of their sign for 10 to 15 minutes. As in other works by the artists from the series Activities for the Head, here too it is Kwiek who plays the sadistic role of the oppressor, performing the repressive element, while Kulik plays the part of the repressed. Though the work ostensibly addressed the restrictions placed on both artists by the state, the internal dynamic of the duo did little to challenge patriarchally ingrained tropes of male as active, female as passive, and so on. Kulik's role in such performances can hardly be characterized as feminist then. The performative emphasis is on challenging state power, but not patriarchy. In a short text on feminism in art in the mid-1990s, sculptor Maria Pińska-Bereš observed that because she was a woman, the baggage of experience that she carried with her today would be classified as feminist. But she confessed, "I deeply hid my experiences, perceptions, and resentment." She said that the process of committing to exploring her experience as a woman produced conflicting emotions. "Once I decided to speak with my own voice," she said, "when I had unblocked the female reservoir, there flowed out a river which led me myself at times into confusion." She was concerned with the liberation of the author's personality, but she said she needed to create the conditions for doing so within a safe space. And many of her performances relied on first staking out a territory. In 1979, in Świeszynonie Miastko, Pińska-Bereš made an installation that she called The Place, a portable monument. It consisted of 4 pink poles arranged around a linen cloth and topped by a canopy bearing the inscription, "There is such a place on earth," fluttering in the wind like a sail. She called it an homage to nature, portable so that it doesn't cause ecological damage, and erected as an act of affirmation. It is powerful because it is humble, simply serving as a framework for making what is already there visible, for marking what is already there, and for drawing attention to it. Janina Ładnowska has argued that if Pińska-Bereš had an extremely ambivalent attitude to monuments, then this may well have been because she'd studied under one of Poland's foremost sculptors, Zawody Dunikowski, at a time when an awful lot of monuments were being created in Poland, chiefly devoted to the martyrdom of the occupation. And as you can imagine, these could not have been more different in tone to Pińska-Bereš's low-key, portable monument, which is characterized by its fragile and understated elegance. Agata Jakubowska has discussed extensively how the artist's particular style distinguished her from the rest of Polish art, and pointed out the role played in her work by fenced-off areas, which she refers to as a field of action for a woman. Pińska-Bereš insisted that women's work, in many undervalued forms, be taken seriously. In 2 performances devoted to laundry from 1980 and 1981, she marked out a space with white posts and a washing line, inside which there were 2 metal tubs with water and a metal washboard, which she had used years earlier to wash her child's diapers. She put on a pink apron and worked. She put on a pink apron and worked slowly and methodically at doing the laundry. After washing, rinsing and wringing out a series of clothes, she hung these out to dry. She hung these out to dry, and each was marked with a letter in pink. Together, these came to read feminism. The action is ended when the artist turned her pink apron into a flag and secured it upright, towering over the installation. That regressive attitudes towards women's work and women's art persisted in experimental circles, just as they did elsewhere in society, was illustrated during the 2nd iteration of the performance in the summer of 1981 in Osieki, near Koszalin. The artist recorded in her summary of the event how the performance was disturbed by an intervention of the Łódź Kaliska members, who threw their dirty linen into the tub. They were all guys. Still, I proceeded as planned, and the letters arranged themselves into the word feminism. She continued washing and hanging out to dry the parts that came together to take the form of a public feminism, displayed for all to see in the afternoon sunshine, and she ignored the dirty vests of her younger male colleagues. Over the course of her career, the artist suffered a range of forms of aggression from viewers and colleagues. Her work was despoiled, her intentions and working methods were criticized, false accusations were made about her by older male colleagues, and her actions were sabotaged by younger male colleagues. Pieniska-Bereś recalled, "I was greatly affected at that time by the opening of exhibitions and comments, either aggressive or ironic. Over a series of years, my work was damaged at exhibitions by some anonymous person." Her recollections speak volumes about the conditions within which she and other women artists were working. Small wonder, perhaps, that she made the decision to put up barriers around her work. These marked her right to her own safe space to carry out her activities in a context where this was far from guaranteed. She insisted that art has to act upon the viewer and must not leave them indifferent. An indifferent viewer is the artist's failure. They may not understand it fully, but it has to act upon them. I want to propose that the viewers that she may have been most interested in targeting were neither members of the official socialist art establishment nor members of the general public. I think many of her actions were designed to speak to her immediate circle of alternative artist colleagues in the first instance. Edith Andras has noted that the counterculture mirrored the way official power worked. Bojana Page, likewise, explains that men continued to dominate in alternative circles in an entirely conventional manner. Page has argued that, quote, "a non-romanticized view of dissident circles has to acknowledge the degree to which, in resisting the oppressive state, they nevertheless carried on time-honored gender relations." Magdalena Abakanowicz's work of the martial law period, Cage and Back, skirted this issue, including an androgynous everyman figure, a body reduced to bare life, with no arms or legs or head, trapped in a gulag-evoking cage. We sense the figure's entrapment viscerally. Abakanowicz described her own experience of traveling abroad as an extraordinary struggle. Every trip to the so-called capitalistic world could involve a nervous breakdown, a catastrophe, or an adventure. The permission to go could be suddenly refused. Sometimes, even if I applied several months in advance, I would only receive my passport 2 hours before my flight. Standing with my suitcase in the police passport office, my hands were shaking, my brain seemed to stop.
There was no thinking, instead a kind of pain like a toothache, like a gastric ulcer, like a muscle cramp. Finally, sitting in the aeroplane, I was again a victor in this competition, a victor and a victim. The price I paid for winning was high. The competition was based on what I had to defend, my existence as an artist, my desperate need to communicate with people through my art, my identity as a citizen of the world, and the identity of my country belonging to the world of culture. This may sound banal, but at that time it was true. There was only one existence. Abakanowicz was all too aware of the fragility of her right to travel, for which she was of course much envied by many of her colleagues. And her testimony hints at the neurological bodily experience of her uncertainty and the potential curtailment of her travel, and she compares it to a dull pain. Now, artists can travel more easily, but it is still often objects that make the pilgrimages required of art in their place. Teresa Murak was to be present at the seminar today and to show a performance, but instead I understand that she made a new work specifically for the museum, which is entitled Obiekt peregrynujący. Again, we need some Euro English here, because the peregrinacja is like kind of movement, or pilgrimage is a better word than... I put pilgrim object, but it's not very good. How are you going to translate it?
We said pilgrimage object.
Yeah.
We can find something else. So yeah.
It is a wandering or pilgrimaging object that consists of a blouse. Oh yeah, this is what Helga, I'm quoting you. Helga wrote in her email to me that it is a wandering or pilgrimaging object that consists of a blouse sprouted with cress seeds and a photograph. The sprouts will wither during transport and will arrive dry at the museum. We hope it will arrive in time for the seminar, she wrote. It would, of course, be wonderful to have Teresa present, but we appreciate this poetic gesture, which is very much in line with her practice, the simplicity of cress, a living shroud. Helga's idea of a shroud is thought-provoking, as is the idea that the object will already likely be dead when it arrives. So many lives are now lost on migrant journeys, long before they reach their destination. So many bodies are never identified or recovered. Migration and mobility, or peregrination, as Murak poetically puts it, is curtailed more aggressively than ever before by a necropolitical order that privileges the movement of goods, capital, and weapons over human rights and dignity. The museum serves as a resting place where objects such as Murak's may act as prompts to continue the dialogue about how sculpture in the expanded field relates to the culture wars today, focused as they are on gender, environmental, and border politics. We have only to recall which executive orders Trump prioritized this week to see how important it is to continue to resist sexual, environmental, and geopolitical necropolitics today. The artists in the exhibition used their sculptural practice to challenge the psychological and political obstacles that they were faced with, and to call into question all restrictions. Rather than being deterred by everything that conspired to stand in their way, these were women who chipped away at the barriers they faced, both internally and externally, experimenting with the plastic exercise or experience of freedom. Their work champions resilience, movement, and life against the forces of entropy and stasis. Thank you.
Thank you for a very nice and interesting presentation. I have to say the object arrived. Teresa Murak's work is outside. It ended up being, when we unwrapped it, it ended up being her working suit, which she wore, or a similar suit that she wore when we visited her in Warsaw. And it's wrapped like a shirt, and it's outside, so you can see it in the lobby area. So just to let you know that. But thank
thank you a lot. And I wanted to ask, are there any questions? No questions? Okay. You can save your questions and ask also Klara during lunch. We're going to have lunch now. It's served outside. For those of you who have pre-bought your lunch, that's outside. You will see some signs, or otherwise you can also buy lunch in the cafeteria. And then if somebody wished to join Helga and me for a short trip to the exhibition at 1 o'clock, you can. Otherwise, the museum is open until 7 tonight, so you have plenty of time to see the exhibition afterwards as well. So 1:10, Helga says yes. So, and then we continue here after lunch. Okay, enjoy.
Okay, we are on a tight schedule and we're running a little bit over. We will continue with an artistic contribution by the Danish artist Luna Scales. The new film Memories by Touch introduced Vibece and me to Scales' fascinating practice, which is primarily video-based. Luna Scales engages with medical language in relation to the disabled body. She often references the portrayal of the female body in classical sculpture, illustrating how medical language objectifies the body by describing it in a similar way as one would describe a sculpture. The real, living body is thus molded, both medically and linguistically, to fit the mold of a normative body. The film has a duration of 18 minutes and will be followed by a response from Ingvil Hellstrand, Associate Professor of Gender Studies at the Department of Media and Social Sciences here at the University of Stavanger. Hellstrand is particularly interested in how science fiction, speculative and creative narrative practices can be used to explore issues of power, difference, collectivity and vulnerability from a more than human perspective. From 2020 to 2024, she researched cultural notions of care and technology in the interdisciplinary project Caring Futures, developing care ethics for technology-mediated care practices. A project that also included an exhibition with contemporary art. We know Hellstrand as an interdisciplinary thinker and an excellent mediator with an interest in art and other cultural practices. Hellstrand has contributed to the museum before, and we are very grateful that she accepted our invitation to share her thoughts on the film Memories by Touch. So we will screen the film, and then I'll invite Ingvil up.
For as long as I can remember, my body has been the work of other people. It has always been something to be examined, to be optimized. My first memories, I don't remember very far back. Its long roots and atmospheres. The smell of vinegar and institutional detergent. That smell is actually a big part of the memories I have. There are lots of things I don't remember, but that smell ties everything together. From an early age, I could say, I have muscular dystrophy, and that means I don't have much strength. I could also tell people my diagnosis. Congenital myopathy, phytotype disproportion. I could say that when I was 8 years old, backwards too. In fact, I still think I can. Når I tok tid, eryt, erif, ikretarium, latinik nok. There you go. I still got it.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to give a short comment to Luna Scales' video work, Memories of Touch. Thank you all also for a very warm welcome. It's such a delicate film, don't you think? It's so soft. The body's moving, even though they are gently touching. It's very caring, very loving. The colors as well. Well, even the body is worked on, stretched, kneaded, almost sensual at times. Also the soothing voiceover and the pastel color scheme. Yet it is also a very powerful film. I think this is part why I really enjoy this work, because it has this allure. It's as almost as if it has this allure of softness, as if it tricks us into a story of care, of survival, of hope for transformation, repair, cure. Maybe even a kind of hope of a transition into normalcy. But this trickery also exposes how easy it is to slip in to an ableist discourse and a strong belief precisely in care and repair as something that will fix people, make them into something that they are not. And at the same time, this trickery showcases how far the care institution reaches into a person's everyday life and practices, and also how it raises questions of bodily agency. So I have two things, because I only have 15 minutes, and I could have had longer, believe me. I have 2 points that I want to make. Because I think that this film, on the one hand, it exposes the logics of care very efficiently, very beautifully, very elegantly. And I also think that's the first point. So the initial setup of the film, I'll just let you know the second point afterwards. Otherwise, it might get confused. I might get confused. Okay, so in the initial setup, we are introduced to the patient, who remembers, and she starts her observations about childhood memories with journey to the hospital and into the examination room, and what happens there. And in the story of the patient, I am reminded of feminist care ethics that I have been working on for a little while. Hang on. Sorry. Feminist care ethics reminds us how we are all vulnerable. We are all in need of care at certain points in our lives. All human beings will be the recipient of care at certain points and the giver of care at other points. And I think Luna Scales' work manages to highlight different kinds of vulnerabilities in her work, even though her focus is on the predefined, most vulnerable bodies. And I think by doing this, the artist manages to shift a power balance, what counts as the most vulnerable. For feminist care ethics or ethicists, an important point is that care is a fundamentally social and collective activity. We all need it, and we are all involved in providing it, even if it happens on different premises and at different stages in life and with different commitments and training. And as such, the caring for others should serve as ethical guidelines for society. This should be the principle. And in a way, the patient that we meet in this story is definitely being cared for. But care ethics was coined by Carol Gilligan in the early 1980s and then developed by people like Joan Tronto in the 1990s. They have the idea is great. Oh, I'm sorry. My computer is being very strange, and that's why I'm stuttering. So I'm just going to fix this instead of trying to pretend that it's not happening and ruining my talk. Excuse me. It's okay. I've got it. So of course, there can be a lot of good self-care and feeling in control and taking control and caring for oneself and being able to manage everyday life for yourself. We have even constructed a care system, as our patient shows us, an institution of care based on certain people's ability to care for others and other people's need of care. And this is where the great idea is. The system is precisely to take care of those we consider the most vulnerable. The problem, however, arises when people who, potentially, and within the logic of this system, feel very far removed from the vulnerable bodies and just feel normal, healthy, abled. So this is a point that our narrator, our patient, returns to several times in the film. How there is a lot of grown-up talk, for example. She is not counted as a subject in the room, even if she is the one being examined. I lost all track of time. She is reduced to a medical object of study rather than the person that she is. This has to do with her disability, perhaps. This has to do with her being a child, perhaps. But this is the logic of a system where some people are not needing care and other people are. So perhaps, as is the doctor, the surgeon in question is redeemed at a later point. Perhaps it's just a slight in this particular film. It echoes the violent history of the medical sciences, where the ill, the weak, or the so-called deviants, even if it's mental illness, sexual, so-called deviants, were not counted as properly human, not quite like the rest of us. And this, the film also problematizes with how the special measures in her school were, what she said, a misunderstood consideration. So the radical potential of care ethics is the attempt to overturn this kind of narrative of what it means to be needy. Because if the starting point is that everybody is vulnerable and in need of care, these hierarchies of who are in need, the patients, the care receivers, and those who aren't in need, the caregivers, would be it would be void. So, feminist care ethics, by centering care as a fundamentally human principle for interaction and living together, it requires a confrontation of how care is defined and by whom. And as such, it is an attempt to challenge established power structures where some people get to define what care is and what it looks like. And this film, for me, enters straight into those discussions. Because in this perspective, Scales' work allows us to shift the roles, at least allows us to think about the shifts in the roles about who is in need of care and how the needy are treated, the needy. The doctor who remembers and addresses the letter to the child that she finds amazing, and the application and the elaborate application of magic cream are examples of good care, efforts to care, but it also makes very visible the absences of that kind of consideration. The highlighting of moments of care also makes visible the absences. And that's what I mean, that this film can help us expose the logic of care. I mean, as someone who's now brought feminist care ethics to the table, I wholeheartedly believe in care, but the institution that care is working under has several flaws that Luna Scales' work points to. And one of them, I think, is this idea that it's always a one-to-one relation between a caregiver and a care receiver. And I think Scales, in this storytelling, where she takes control of the narrative and take ownership of her own story, problematizes the idea that she is just a needy patient. And that brings me to the second point that I want to make. Because I think, having now said, my analysis of the film being about the logics of care, exposing the violence in care systems, is a contrast with the film's very beautiful, soft and quiet visual language. And in this contrast, there's also something very powerful, I think, and this contrast is made visible in the storytelling. So in the one hand, she's telling the story of how she's been observed, examined, defined, poked and prodded due to her illness or disability. Again, how she's become this object of study and someone who needs care and repair. On the other hand, the storyteller resists this assigned position, being rather more impatient than patient. And that's a very bad language play, I'm sorry. But I think the way the narrator explores her own diagnosis by saying it backwards, for example, is a way, it's a strategy of resistance. Also quoting Pretty Woman and popular culture as a and then again problematizing her 13-year-old self's use of this particular quote is our word plays and plays with language that reminds me of Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction. Ursula Le Guin is, for those who don't know her, a great feminist science fiction writer that you should all read. And in this, her carrier bag theory of fiction, she problematizes, or she argues that the names we give things, the words we use, have a lot of power. So the whole carrier bag theory of fiction is a critique of how the story is always, many stories, fairy tales, literature, fiction, are heroes' stories. I think Luna Scales deliberately is trying to not to tell a hero's story. It's not about surviving the torture of the care system. It's about how do you become an individual within this system. And I think the reflections around both the backwards diagnosis and Pretty Woman are pretty clear examples of this. And for Ursula Le Guin as well, the words you choose have power to story the world a little bit differently. And one example is when the father needs persuasion to leave her bedside, and she has ganged up with this nurse. I think this is also going back to my previous point, this is also a moment in the film where the role of the caregiver and the care receiver is reversed, very powerfully so. But it also disturbs some other boundaries, because she also says that she's quite the act of caring for her father to make him take a break, ganging up with her nurse, but it's also something that she actually enjoys, because it's a chance to hang around with this beautiful nurse for a little while. So this moment disturbs a lot of boundaries in the classical way of how we think about a patient and how we think about boundaries between the subject and the object of the story. This is one of the moments, and there are several, but this is one moment I want to highlight, where the storyteller really becomes the subject of her own story, not just describing how she has been an object for several times. It also disturbs the boundaries between the patient and the agent, because she takes charge of this moment. And of course, it also brings in elements, boundaries between the asexual and the sexual, family and erotic desire, and of stuckness and flexibility. So I think this is it's a very beautiful moment in this film. So by highlighting these two things, exposing the logics of care and the carrier bag theory of fiction, I see these as two strategies for resistance. The first is suggesting that vulnerability can be a norm. It doesn't have to be normal people versus the needy or vulnerable people. Our protagonist can be both. The other point is, from the carrier bag theory of fiction, is that you can change the language of things. You can expose the inadequacy of dichotomies such as body-mind, object-subject, caregiver, caretaker. You don't have to say it backwards, but disability is an extreme form of instability in identity, because to ask if our notion of identity can encompass the multiple, the unstable, that which we cannot define properly, necessarily, that we cannot box in, this also makes it a feminist issue. So what Scales offer us is a way of confronting fixed notions of disabled and abled bodies, as well as the conventional relationship between a carer and a cared for. So confronting perception and giving the storyteller the agency to give us a view to dissolve the notion of the passive patient who needs to be fixed is indeed a way of articulating the plasticity of how we see the world and the bodies and the perspectives in it. Thank you.
That was amazing to listen to your perspectives, and I've learned so much more placing this work in a context of the knowledge that you have. I don't know if it's if we should ask for a response to a response, but if there's a response to the film or a question for Ingvil, there's just enough time for that. Anyone? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was very, very interesting theoretically, and your analysis of the dialogue is so interesting. I was also interested in, and just thought it worth maybe just mentioning how their roles are switched on the screen. I know everybody probably noticed that, but you kind of very tactfully didn't mention it. But I think that it is, and it happens so kind of gently. But at the end, you know, she is the carer, as it seems, and the idea, she's really scrambled our idea of what the hand should do and who is deciding which is the model and which is, you know, and so in that way, I think what's interesting about it is that the body is like a material that is being shaped, and that's why it's so sculptural in a way, right? It's kind of sculpture, what we're seeing.
No, thank you for that. I absolutely agree. And it's I'm not an art historian, but that's thank you so much for bringing that in. The camera angle also makes this point, as you said. But I think this is the sculpting of the body, not just necessarily as the caring way that it is done. Well, the part of my point is also that all bodies are sculpted. It's just that some bodies, it's more visible how they're being sculpted and the norms surrounding this sculpting. So yeah, but thank you.
So we will continue and with the next lecturer. Marika Kuźmicz is an art historian, curator and researcher. She is the main curator of research at the Museum researcher at Susch Institute at the Museum Susch in Switzerland. Additionally, she is Dean of the Faculty of Artistic Research and Curatorial Studies at the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw and an active lecturer. For many years, she has conducted research on Polish art of the 1970s, with particular focus on advocating for performance photography and video art. Kuźmicz will broaden the perspectives of the exhibition by introducing and talking about artists that are not included in the show. As mentioned earlier, the aim of the part 2 of this seminar is to broaden the perspectives of the exhibition and bringing in other voices and practices, making connections across national borders. Please welcome Marika.
Thank you so much. I titled my presentation Sand Instead of Marble. And I would like to introduce you today 3 artists. I would like to also, in reference to this, what Klara said about the term plastic, it was also very inspiring for me, and I think it's important because we discussed about this during the lunch break, that this is not only translation issue, it's not only between Polish-English, but it's when I was studying art history in Poland 15 years ago or something, it was not allowed for us to use this term plastic. Instead of, we had to use visual art, and the term plastic, that was something you could find in the catalogs from the 60s in Polish. And now I have to admit that I find this term as a very comfortable because it, you know, it's a connection to the materiality. And this is why I also wanted to thank you again for this, also for the title, because it was really inspiring and it put me on a trace of, you know, we have here the trace, the line of thinking about this presentation, which I hope you will find interesting in some way. So today I would like to present you the profiles of 3 Polish artists, 2 of them born in the 50s, one born in the beginning of the 40s, Barbara Kozłowska and Małgorzata Potocka and Iwona Lemke-Konard. As the axis of this presentation, I have chosen their 4 realizations, 4 works, in which their own body always plays a special role. This is because it is an element of the work. First, maybe I will move the slide. And the second thing is that because today probably we can consider all of them as a performers, but
I would like to also put the intention on the fact that there is always a very material element in their realization. I don't think that I have any conclusion, but I would like to put maybe rather some questions, because we have here some, traces, some elements of this process that we cannot consider only as a documentation. And I would like to maybe ask the question, how we can treat this part of the process. Yeah, I think that that of course this three artists I would like to present you today. They are not the only exceptions we have. Not only these three examples. We can also include the works by Eva Partum or Teresa Murak as well, but I would like to expand a little bit the circle of the artists you presented during the exhibition. So I believe that the works by Barbara Kozłowska, by Małgorzata Potocka, Iwona Lemke-Konard are really good examples to ask the question about the role and the status of the artist's body in the process of making art, and to ask for the status of the traces, some reminders or relicts of the performances, or perhaps the focus can be maybe shift in this case, and we can try to redefine the status of these elements, like photos, like photo books, photo objects, and even sand cones, as you can see. So the slide you can see here, it's the biography of Barbara Kozłowska, written by herself. I was born in Poland. I exhibited a lot, and always where I did not want to exhibit. Where I wanted to exhibit, I did not exhibit. I traveled, I performed, I went where I wanted to go for important artistic reasons. I traveled with all available means of transport as far as possible. I read on branches in galleries and on video. I built, I moved, I repeated things, I built theoretical models of concepts. I moved the borderline to the moon, and everywhere I always repeated the same banal sentences about art and reality, or the same banal truth about art. I wrote obvious things about things. I took part in exhibitions in Poland, Romania, Great Britain, Italy, Yugoslavia. I traveled to Siberia, to Great Britain, to Malta, to Italy, Yugoslavia, and France. These words by Kozłowska. She was born in 1940 and died in 2008, about herself. And this is the form of autobiography without, as you could see, no punctuations, no capital letters. I think that we can treat this text as an object because she also exhibited it quite often. It's not only accompanied of her exhibitions and catalogs, but it was included in many of them. Simply laconic, it touches upon some of the matters that she found most important for her work and for art in general, like movement, travel, presence, which is I think the key word for her, space, exploration of space, exploration of time, and so on. There is this text. It's a bit provocative, and the same with the phrase. You can see it all anywhere. That was her motto, her credo, which she uses to describe her artistic practice. It was her sentence work, sentence manifesto, the key sentence that unlocked her art, built upon constant observation of everyday phenomena.
Another interesting aspect of her autobiographical is how the subject manifests herself in such a personal approach, writing in the first person in a simple way that she was understandable to a wide audience, what was a rare occurrence in Poland art in the 70s. Because artists' texts at the time in Poland were very typically, as you probably know already, dominated by scientific language, rather hermetical. So that an essentially simple message was often made deliberately obscure. Kozłowska's texts about her own art were clearly focused on authentic communication with the audience. The artist wrote a lot about her work, but only a small part of this text was published. She is now her husband, who is the owner of her archive, and he is also an artist. He described her as a known and unknown at the same moment, because she was a key figure of avant-garde art scene in Wrocław, but she became forgotten in some way. She was born in Tarnobrzeg, and her family was really badly affected by Second World War. Her father was killed in concentration camp, as well as her two brothers. So only her mother and Barbara and her older sister survived, and they after the Second World War, they moved to Wrocław. Their financial situation was very bad, but despite of this, her mother agreed to. She led her daughter to fulfill her dream and study art. Unfortunately, this dream school, which was now, this is the Academy of Fine Arts in Wrocław. At that time, it was here we have the plastic issue term, because that was the Plastic Art University, National Plastic Art University. We could translate it like this. And she was very disappointed by this school. She had really bad memories, and apparently because she was not able to find herself in this bureaucratic structure of the educational system in the People's Republic in Poland in the late 50s and early 60s. And I even found some information at her archive that was, she left thousands of notebooks and notes, and also her diaries. And I found there is the quote that she if it would be possible, she would love to study she would frequently refer to choose Black Mountain College because it was interdisciplinary, as the art school should be, and Wrocław school I found as a very different from this. But despite of that, she started to act as a member of a few informal groups of Wrocław art scene, and she started to develop her performance practice, even if it wasn't called performance in Poland at that time. And in here I wanted to just show you to put maybe her a little bit more into the context, because here you can see Natalia LL, at that time Natalia Lach, it was before she married Andrzej Lachowicz, and Barbara Kozłowska, because they studied together. in Wrocław. And in 1967, and here we are closer to the topic of my presentation, Kozłowska began making one of her most important works, Borderline, or The Line. The idea was drawing a line across the globe from east to west, and she had this idea probably a few years earlier. I think that she started to think about the line in 1964, because I found some notes about this idea in her archive with some date. But maybe it's not that important, but the important is that in 1967 she was able to make a trip to Lake Baikal in Siberia. And that was the starting point for this really long-term action, because she was developing this performance until the end of her life, actually. And here you can see some documentation, and this especially this picture on the left is important because it's Barbara herself. Importantly, the action was not a byproduct of the journey, but the very reason for it. And the artist manifested her presence on the shore of the lake by arranging small stones into cones. You can see it maybe somewhere here. Here we have another place. It was in Edinburgh. Zbigniew Makarewicz, Barbara's husband, remembers that Barbara insisted on having her photo taken as she was squatting in a black swimsuit on the lake shore, becoming a living cone herself here. And she would repeat the action of forming cones many times in different places, in Osieki in Poland, during the famous plenaires. Also Malta, Edinburgh, she was invited by Richard de Marco there, and California. Wherever possible, Kozłowska made sand cones, like here you can see it, or here, Łazy, Poland. I love this documentation, and this is also important because she, after all, she worked on this documentation, like putting some colors or using some different kind of film tape to get this effect of colors. So it wasn't like she treated it as a pure, performance documentation, but she was also really careful with about the final result, what she got from these activities. And she retrospectively described some of her works as, quote, events, because you have to be aware of you are, but it's important to also underline that the term performance wasn't present in Polish language at the time. So she described them as events and as a presence of herself with minimal intervention. At the same time, these small gestures were clearly connected with Kozłowska's need to exist as a subject in relation to time and space. The time and space, these two words appear very often in her notes. As at this point, I shall maybe return to artist's biography present at the beginning of this paper, which aptly characterized this aspect of her attitude, that she was based on constant examination of her dynamic situation or position in the world. Most of Kozłowska's works could be described in terms of mapping the universe in both conceptual and literal sense, using the measure of her own physical body, and also her memory, her perception, etc., etc. Here I can show you also some later events. Here is San Francisco from 1990, and here she stopped using the sand or the stones, but she was appearing by herself. I think this is the one of the last events that she took in Świnoujście in Poland. She was also ill during actually her most of her life. It's also it refers to the previous paper we had, because when she was 12, she was diagnosed with the heart illness, and she was told that she will probably die when she will be around 20. But thanks to the careful care, she survived. So this is Kozłowska, and now I would like to show you a few works of Małgorzata Potocka. Małgorzata Potocka, she was born in 1953, and she's a famous Polish actress, just recently recognized also as an artist, wife of a famous husband, Józef Robakowski, one of the key figure of Polish avant-garde art scene in Łódź. But she was active as an artist, visual artist, from from half of the 70s. She wanted to be a camera woman. She is also a daughter of famous Polish film scenographer, but her father told her that it's too difficult, too complicated, and too challenging for women. So she graduated of actress faculty and film school in Łódź, and then director faculty. And so she grew up in a family closely connected to film. Also her mother, she was a film director, and she made her debut as a visual artist in 1976 during the group exhibition. It was important exhibition for Polish avant-garde offer in Lublin. It's important because there is also a very important quote in February 1980, and this is the catalogue by her published at the time. She declared that she uses herself as a medium in her art. By doing so, she suggested that there was a close relation between her own being and the recording medium. She was mostly interested in doing photographies, but in this very special way. So here you can see the work Corrections from 1981, portraits in trial frames used by doctors to examine eye defects. Changing the lenses causes differences in my perception of reality and significant visual changes. And here there is another example. Notebook, where she used the camera to record her body. And here it's also interesting because she started to transforming her multiplied portraits in a kind of installations and objects. But today I would like to mention one work from 1982 made together with Richard Boulez, who was at the time in Poland. He came there from US, and he became a very important figure in the Polish avant-garde art scene. And here you can see them both traveling to start to making the work I would like to show you. Honor Guard from 1982, and I would like to focus on this works because this work has been virtually actually unexplored. I would say that it was almost unknown until now. Now she just started to exhibit them, and she repeated them also after the war in Ukraine started. But I find it as a very complex and thus also provocative. Here we have an artist who makes the serious but essentially also ironic gesture of keeping guard at strange, often incomprehensible to us objects, like you can see it here. I will translate the slogans later for you. And here, this is easy, it's peace, pokój, peace. So we can stay with this. Places on which the communist authorities inscribe some slogans that today we consider as absurd. But at that time, in 1982, it was hard to say that they would be ever to be considered such, because the authority seemed more powerful than ever. That was in the middle of the Marshall state in Poland. And the authority were frozen in its attempt to hold on to itself as an authority and to keep the power. And the artist herself is similarly frozen in some way. She transformed herself in a kind of statue, like Zofia Kulik. In essence, what we have here is a performative action without an audience and without any movement, exclusively to the camera. But the artist takes a form close to that of a statue. She freezes, depriving herself of movement, although we realize that this is a kind of illusion. Perhaps Potocka's intention was to personify how fragile the political system is, or she had an intuition that it was like this, although there was no indication of this at that time. That's why she used her body, a fragile entity, a fragile matter that she tried to monumentalize, to express this thought. By becoming a monument, she was at the same time unmasking the constructs of socialism, and her body had a very specific political role in this view. I don't know many examples of that kind of approach. And here, about the slogans, I should maybe translate them, but I didn't. So here it's, for example, and what have you done for normalization of living in our country? So this is the slogan put by the officials during the Marshall State. Here, the Communist Party as a servant of the nation, and so on and so on. And the third example I would like to show you, it's Iwona Lemke-Konard. Iwona Lemke-Konard was born in 1958 in Bydgoszcz, but from an early age she lived with her parents in Szczecin. Now she lives in Toronto, but she visited Stavanger several times, and she asked me to pass her best wishes to you. And she has begun attending art classes organized at the Palace of Yacht, and that was her first meeting with art. In 1973, she began her studies in high school, where she developed interest in photography, inspired largely by summer trips to the artistic festival of academic youth Fama in Świnoujście. And one of her first works, Lemke did, was a series of self-portraits taken in '75 by camera borrowed from her uncle, and self-portraits were always present in her work, in her art, and she was accepted in 1977 to the Faculty of Art at the University in Toruń, and continuing her high school interest, she began to combine photography and seriography in college due to her fascination with the use of light in both techniques. And she always she tried to expand the medium of photography, and here I wanted to show you the series of her self-portrait titled Women's Art. She started this cycle in 1978, and she showed this works for the first time in 1981. So she photographed herself, personified various female personas. Carefree, stubborn, laughing, graceful, serious, like here. She told me once that there was an anecdote standing behind this makeup, because she put this makeup on her face and then she took these photos. Like, I think that was her mom. She advised her to put some makeup to look more, to look better. And this is what she did. She put some makeup, like we can see it here. So this work is very complex, because first we have here this the role of the body as a kind of canvas, like she treated her body as a art object. Then we have the photo, but then it's even, that's again the next layer, because she put some stamps into these photos, and she produced some postcards, sending them to her friends and family. There is the motif of this ship, which is a leitmotif of the whole. I also very much like this. So she treated her body first as an object, and then also the result of this activity, it's also a kind of object. She also told me once that she never, that she didn't want to treat them as a photos, but rather as a kind of sculptures or objects. Maybe this is the best word. And to conclude, I also wanted to show you one more work, The Limits of Human Possibilities. I put here the link, so maybe we can share the presentation after all, so you can see it. It's available online at the Archive of Museum of Contemporary Art in Warsaw, created by her in 1984. And she made this work while she was pregnant, when her thoughts revolved precisely around the title question, what are the limits of human possibilities? She realized the theme using several different media. There was a film, like this is the still from this film, a series of photographs, and later an artist book. In the film, the artists take poses juxtaposed with the lines drawn on the wall. Black lines resembling the outlines of mountain ranges repeat the changing arrangements of her body, or vice versa, we don't know actually. And then she also produced the this book. And here, this is another that kind of situation when we have this different results, and it's not important what was the starting point, because for her all of these elements are equal and important enough. So to conclude, as I started this presentation, I would like to maybe ask this question: if should we consider all of that kind of elements and materials again, and ask again the question about the role of that kind of things as a result of the art doing process. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for introducing us to these fantastic artists that we have not included in the show, for broadening up the perspectives of the exhibition, which we asked you so kindly to do. Are there any questions for Marika? Or comments? Or no, you can ask her also in a short break. So we will have a short break quite soon. Just to conclude, we would like to thank all the speakers of today for giving us these insightful perspectives connected to the exhibition. We will please make sure that you also, before we take a break, also see the magnificent artwork of Teresa Murak outside in the lobby area. And yeah, there are quite a lot of would you like to mention that? Yeah. Yes. And then there are quite a lot of resources, or quite a few resources on the exhibition page from the museum. There are some films that we have made, and this seminar will be published there when it's finished edited. And we will also have a short or a really nice text by Sofie Ringstad, which we will make a very small digital publication where she talks about the absence. And one way of looking at Teresa Murak's work is the absence of a body, but still this traveling object that will travel on to new exhibitions, like this little relic that's come and visited us here in Stavanger. So.
So pop into the website after in a few days, and you will find the recordings of today's seminar and a lot of other resources which we collect there and we hope will live on. And we will conclude today's program with a performance by the artist Veronika Lewandowska. In the multimedia performance prompt, she forecasts the weather of the future by crafting multimodal prompts or metaphors that engaged in a creative and critical dialogue with artificial intelligence. Through this exploration, she questions whether AI can aid humanity in making better decisions on crucial matters. Can it help us avoid wars or foster global cooperation? Without the biological body, can AI develop a substitute for embodied memory? Veronika Lewandowska is a poet, performer, and researcher dealing with new media and immersive experiences. She holds a PhD in cultural studies and has been an active initiator of VJ events, grassroots initiatives, and new media exhibitions. Lewandowska co-directed the award-winning VR erotic poem Knock Nights, which premiered at Sundance and has been showcased at international festivals and exhibitions, including the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. In both her research and artistic works, she combines the methods of artistic research with academic research. So by ending the seminar and exhibition with this performance, we aim to emphasize the importance of art, experimentation, and critical engagement. and it feels meaningful to conclude by pointing toward the future. So please join us for coffee in the foyer now, and we will resume here at 3:30. Yeah, sharp. Thank you.
Look up. The sky is wide open. The air is transparent for miles into space. I see the cloudless future. The horizon strings the bow. The sun aims at me. I am opening my arms. And at that moment, I feel my body is the gathering of happiness particles. Because how lucky I am that I can live here under this sky, listening only to myself. So safe. So safe. Even though I know it's about to change in the clouds. Data translate the past into the futures. And still something doesn't add up. And still something doesn't add up. And still something doesn't add up. Can't wrap your head around it. Nor can AI account for everything. As a result, what most people don't want returns.